And I think we'll put this slide up again at the end so folks can have that URL. And with that, we will transition to our panel. So everybody's names are on the slide, but we're actually going to ask them to introduce themselves in a second here. So panelists, if you want to come on. Hello. So our first question is basically just asking all of you to introduce yourself and describe your current role or roles, plural. And Christopher, do we want to start with you? Oh, technical moment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christopher Whitaker. I am a digital service expert and bureaucracy hacker at the United States Digital Service.
Jean?
Hi, I'm Jean Cochran. I'm a senior data scientist at the Cook County Assessor's Office.
Junbei?
Hey, I'm Junbei Po, and I'm a lecturer in the Masters of Urban Spatial Analytics program at the University of Pennsylvania. And also I consult with Jarvis in Philadelphia, where I'm sometimes lucky enough to work with Lori.
And Nikki?
Hey, everybody. I am Nikki. I am the Director of Product at the New Practice Lab at New America. And relevant to today's conversation, I also worked at 18F for 6 years.
Yeah, okay, thank you, everybody. So our first kind of more substantial question is to ask you to expand on that and describe maybe a little bit more of what you do at your day job. So like, what are some of the typical things that you are doing in your current role? And this time we'll start with Nikki.
Yeah, for sure. So my role at New America is really focused on our direct partnerships with governments, community-based organizations, nonprofits, et cetera. So I drive scoping of the projects that we do together. I help put together who the actual team is, and then I lead the project on the ground. So a lot of our collaborations are with states, and our goal is to help people, especially low-income people in America who have children, get better access to government-provided benefits. So we work with government benefits agencies and help them as much as we possibly can.
Junbei.
Sure. So in my academic role at University of Pennsylvania, I teach how to design and build products that are primarily for public sector stakeholders. And those products heavily feature spatial data like that you would get from transit agencies or energy organizations or local governments, what have you. And then with my consulting role, currently I am working with the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans, and the main thing that I'm helping them with is to reimagine the way that they give out grants to all of the different agencies and organizations within California that apply for grants from this organization, from Caltrans.
Jean?
So the Cook County Assessor's Office is the office in the county that estimates the value of properties for the purposes of calculating property tax. And the data department within the Assessor's Office has kind of like two main roles, one of which is to produce estimates for residential properties. So we do the statistical modeling for the residential pipeline. Second big role is producing reports, producing interactives, analyzing basically like figuring out how well are we doing and then reporting that out to make sure that we are working towards assessments that are as accurate, fair, and transparent as possible. So within that team, I'm a data scientist. I'm not a trained statistician. My background is mostly in software engineering. So day to day, I'm mostly doing data engineering work. And we are also very cyclical, given that we handle assessments in the county are done on a 3-year cycle. We kind of do a big batch of reassessments every year. So there's a period of the year that's very data science heavy and a period of the year that's more data analysis, data engineering heavy.
Christopher, yeah.
So I work at the United States Digital Service. We are a team of technologists based out of the White House, working to help agencies deliver better government services. We've been doing this for 9 years, working with over 20 different federal agencies. As a bureaucracy hacker, my role on the team is to understand all the processes, the policies, all the things that, all the machinery of government, so we can then guide the team to build something either around those that fits the existing procedures and policy, or convince an agency that, hey, we could do this a slightly better way if we alter this process and ultimately lead to a better result for the American people.
Thank you all. I think this one is a little bit more kind of looking back as well. So how has the civic technology field changed since you first got involved, and what challenges and opportunities do you see for the field right now? And so maybe as part of that, you can touch on like prior experiences that you have had as well. And for this one, we will start again with Christopher.
Yeah, so one of the things that really stick out to me in terms of what's changed is we're starting to convince people that this is the way we do things. We can build government services with human-centered design. We can build services that meet the needs of users, are informed by metrics, and really meet the goals of the programs that they're working on. I am also really happy to see a lot more governments take on digital service work. We have several states that have started their own digital services, including in Colorado. Additionally, we now have more opportunities for more early stage career people to go into government as technologists. I think they're in their second year now, but there's a US Digital Corps that is for people who just got out of college who want to do this work professionally. And I'm really excited to see that program get started, because I think 9 years ago, you had to be sort of more senior in your field to work at some place like USDS. And it was harder to sort of get in earlier in your career.
Jean.
I feel like I'm not very qualified to answer this question, like especially speaking after Christopher, who's been doing this like forever and is very deep inside the belly of the beast. But I guess one thing I could speak to is like, how has my own experience of civic technology changed in the past, like 8 years since I've been in the field? I think that I have become much less focused on, I've become much less invested in the idea of like communications technology in isolation being the primary blocker towards kind of like achieving justice and equality, much less oriented towards kind of volunteerism, and much more interested in building out capacity within government and thinking about like organizations and people as opposed to specific technologies, which I think is kind of reflected in how my career has progressed, starting out in consulting, like really focusing on the technical side, now moving into government itself, starting to think more organizationally, although in a limited capacity with where I'm at now. So that's all that I can personally say, but I'm really excited to hear what y'all have to think. I'm also really excited to hear how Lori would answer this question too. So I don't know if that's allowed, but take that prompt if you're interested, Lori.
You're breaking the format. Maybe at the end, but I'll kick it to Junpei now.
Yeah, so I think so when I first started getting into Civic Tech, so quick background, like back in 2010, I was working in a research lab at Penn, and we were doing like modeling and simulation tools for social sciences. And most of the money for doing that was coming from the DoD at the time, and that wasn't really for me. And so I started trying to wish that I could like apply the things that I was doing in that lab to just making the kinds of real world communities that I was actually a part of better, as opposed to, just like non-wartime communities. So I started searching around for like how to do that, and it was hard because like this was back in 2010, and I don't know whether like civic tech as a thing actually existed. There were organizations that definitely existed and and no longer do in the same kind of way, like Open Plans and Sunlight Foundation and such. But I didn't know of the term civic tech, and I don't think it was as large a term as it is today. And so most of the things that I found that interested me when I was searching were just kind of one-off projects, kind of disconnected from a community. And so like I used to find myself going from Philadelphia up to New York to take part in some of the Open Plans roundtables that would occur because there was no real community in my city. But I think it was a pretty fortuitous time for me to start looking for something like this, this unnamed thing that became Civic Tech, because a community across the country very soon started to cohere. Thanks to, in part, to early work by organizations like Code for America, but also I feel like there was some kind of zeitgeist, some sort of like a je ne sais quoi kind of thing going on. So I feel like one of the big ways that the field has changed is that there is an actual distinct community of practice that grew up around this term of civic tech. And one of the challenges I see is just maintaining the cohesion of that community as civic tech grows up as a practice, which is why I'm grateful for people like Christopher who are actually doing the work to keep that community cohered and making sure it thrives.
Nikki?
Yeah, I think, so I spent a lot of time, like I mentioned, at 18F working inside the federal government. And a lot of what I saw changing over the time that I was there was a real shift from focusing on like innovation and disruption towards focusing on sustainability and capacity building. Like the initial projects were very like, we're going to show you a different way. We're going to show you stuff you've never seen before. We're going to blow your mind, right? And then it turned into, over time, as we started to get like the kind of foothold that Christopher talked about and the buy-in, it turned into, we're going to teach you how to do things. We're going to show you how to incorporate this deeply into your practice. And we're going to help you like take ownership of things. So like a good example, right, is like the incorporation of human-centered design and user-centered design practices into agencies and trying to go to government agencies and say, hey, like, we know that you sort of intrinsically are motivated to help people, but the way you're going about it isn't necessarily leading to that outcome. So here's a way to collaborate on that and teach you some new approaches, and then do the bureaucracy hacking and like overarching air cover to make sure that you can actually do it that way.
Yeah, that I think, to go back to Jean's break the format, I think you all mostly touched on things that because I'm, I think, much newer to the field than all of you. And I think it's been interesting to join as someone in the last couple of years who's specifically interested in this. And like, there's these opportunities. There are organizations that exist. It is kind of like a defined field. There's even like Sid Harrell's book, like there's like a manual now, like kind of thing. And so I think it's the kind of people who are attracted to a field that already exists tend to be different than the kind of people who want to create a field. And I think that that's always like a transition to go through between like, how I think you all kind of touched on this, like how do things get institutionalized, and like what does it mean for people to kind of join, like do the kind of principles and practices that first group kind of were focused on, is that still applicable for the second group? And then like what does that kind of look like? So, and I think I do want to ask if anyone else has anything they want to add on like opportunities or challenges right now. Like, do you see changes coming or things that you're seeing that are different, like new challenges or like new opportunities now that things maybe are a little more institutionalized, that anyone wants to speak to before we move on?
I think one of the nuts that I've seen people trying to crack is, how do you make things that endure through political transitions and changes in elected officials? Because you can get like really good buy-in from of particular administration. And this is at every level. This is at the city level, county level, state, federal, like all those levels, right? You get these electoral cycles. And I think now that we've all existed for long enough to have experienced several of those, we're like, oh yeah, sometimes you're working on a thing and there's so much buy-in and everything's amazing. And then an election happens and completely new people come in and they're not necessarily on board with what you've been working on. And even if they are on board with what you've been working on, they're not up to speed with what's happening. And so that can lead to like a sort of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of thing. So I think we're all trying to figure out like, okay, how do we make things that like endure that smoothly?
Yeah, does anyone else want to add to that before next question? If not, next question is, what, if anything, do you think distinguishes civic tech from traditional technology roles? Like, are there different skill sets involved or different things that people should think about when for a civic technology role or career versus a traditional technology role? And we can start with Nikki.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that are really interesting and different. I think one thing is just what you were working on is something that needs to be like steadfast and reliable in most cases. And so if you think about like the Silicon Valley scene, for example, that's all about like make a big splash, make something super disruptive, only focus on the part of the audience that's going to help your product grow, right? And so, you know, as like a product person, that's sort of the initial mindset is, right, like you have this trail off of people, and in normal product roles, you're like, oh, those people are an edge case and they don't matter for my like shiny widget that I'm selling. And in government, that's like basically the opposite. Like just today I was in all these conversations with people where I was like, there's this like large portion of this audience that I'm just not worried about because they'll be fine. And then there's this other much smaller portion of our audience who is super vulnerable, who's super deeply affected by access to a benefit. And those are the people that I care about the most, even if they're smaller in number, even if they're a much smaller percentage of the benefit that we give out. Those are the ones we should be focusing on. And it kind of, you know, if any of you know Ron Bronson, I would suggest looking up Ron Bronson because he's been pioneering a lot of stuff that he calls consequence design. And I think that's like the right mindset for government, is like, not just like, how can I do the thing, but also like, what are the consequences of the ways that I'm doing it? How can I be thoughtful about it? So it's a lot more of that kind of thinking and a lot less of like the super like marketing, technology innovation. Like if you're like, I want to be like R&Ding the shiniest things, there's a couple places in government, like the ARPAs, where stuff like that happens. And I don't want to discount that. You know, but a lot of the work is just something really reliable in a very thoughtful way. And I think for the right kind of person, like that's way more fun and interesting anyway.
Junbei?
Yeah. So what distinguishes? So I don't think there should be different skill sets involved between like civic tech and the broader technology industry. I've kind of felt like almost all technology should be civic tech in a sense. And I don't know if this is kind of a hot take, but you know, I think for me, the most important thing about civic technology is the ethics of building something that has positive impacts on real life communities. If I were to like put it in a few words, and that the technology or the people who are building that technology have that ethos as a primary concern, as opposed to some, you know, building something because it's shiny, because it's cool, because it's profitable, etc. You know, so I know that that kind of creates a really broad umbrella, but I just think that that's been my perspective, that civic tech is more than about just like the stuff that we're doing for government. So sure, there's like a general focus on government, but I don't think that gov tech and civic tech are fully overlap. In fact, I think there's a lot of civic tech that's, you know, done for journalism or in the nonprofit space, or I don't know, for education, which, you know, overlaps with government often, but not always. So I do think that the ethics of civic tech aren't the ethics of tech in general right now, and those are the things that folks have been talking about, like building things that are stable and reliable, building things that aren't always shiny and that actually help real people. But yeah, I think the ethos of what drives people and companies to create the technology is really what distinguishes civic tech for me, rather than like specific skill sets or working in government, what have you.
Jean.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm definitely with Djembe that like there are there's like many different players within a large ecosystem that you might call civic tech. And each of those little niches require different types of skill sets. I guess I would like, if I had to kind of boil it down to a key difference, I think if you're working in private sector technology, there's a very high likelihood that your company is controlled by like one of two financial models. Like either you have a ton of investor capital and you're burning through it really fast in an attempt to just like grow really, really quickly and then eventually exit, and some people make a ton of money and some people don't. Or you're like a gigantic organization already that's exploiting economies of scale and has like a ton of bureaucracy and a lot of internal politics, but also like a lot of cushiness. And I do feel like the civic tech roles that I have been in have felt very different from both of those. Just like the model, the kind of like material foundation of what's going on is very different. Like in the non-governmental space, it's much more likely that a civic tech organization is either a nonprofit or is contracting with nonprofits, which I think introduces like the whole larger organizational funding scheme of the nonprofit industrial complex into what you're doing. I think like on the government side, you're probably funded through taxes. You're probably like the head of your department is an elected official, and you have these kind of like cycles to be concerned about, as Nikki was mentioning before. So I do think that like those, there in all of those different situations, there are different skill sets that are required. I think that maybe like broadly, I would boil it down to in nonprofit and government spaces, I have experienced like needing to be comfortable with less, being like kind of very connected to the mission and being interested in like, as Christopher calls it, bureaucracy hacking, like figuring out who are the people making the decisions and what is like the leverage that I have over them, versus like in the private sector, I don't even know. I feel like I've like repressed what my emotional state was like working in the private sector, but it was a lot, you know, a lot more of a focus on like building cutting edge technology and like kind of building a resume around being a technologist in that kind of way. So I don't know, those are just some scattered thoughts, and I'm sure that Christopher is going to have a lot more interesting things to say.
Well, I was going to plus one what y'all said, particularly Nikki's point about government needs to serve everybody. And that means like everybody. We're not like a private company who gets to pick their customers. One of the things that USDS did during the pandemic was we helped the Postal Service build out the site where you got your free COVID test shipped to you. That thing had to work. It had to be easy. And you literally had to be able to ship the COVID test to everybody in America, literally everybody. So it's a far different type of problem set than, let's see, let me get a startup that's going to cater to a bunch of influential people so I can make a lot of money. It's very different mission sets. For USDS, that is deliver better government services to the American people through technology and design. And to do that, we hire a bunch of talented engineers, data scientists, and product managers, engineers, and people that have that government experience, who knows how the machinery works, so that we can help navigate around problems. The other skill set that we have that you might not necessarily find in the private sector is we help government rethink how they should go about purchasing technology. There's an old joke, and I apologize because I can't remember who said it first, but somebody's first year in a civic tech organization, why is everybody talking about procurement? Second year, this thing sounds like it's important. Third year, yes, Sasha McGee. Fourth year, oh my God, we have to fix procurement. It's the most important thing we could do. And it sounds crazy out of context, but part of the reason why government technology is the way it is because of how the government has purchased things traditionally. And we have worked with agencies to better develop their skill set in terms of being able to buy things through an agile process. I will give a big shout out to 18F's De-risking Technology Guide, which is a great reference to people in government, both state and federal, to go, IT procurement is risky. Most of those things failed. Here's how you can lower the risk. So that's a far different way of looking at the world than just being a private company whose goal is to have a big exit at the end.
Thank you all. And last planned question before we go to audience questions. Do you have any advice for people who are looking to enter the civic tech field? And for those who have worked in government, any tips for seeking government roles in particular? And starting with Christopher this time.
Sure. So I'll give two pieces of advice. One for more early career. Definitely check out US Digital Corps if you're interested in doing government work as a technologist. That's something that wasn't always available when Civic Tech first started out, but now you can get a 2-year fellowship through the US Digital Corps, and it's a really great way to get in. For people later in their career, definitely showcase how you look at things through being user-focused. At nearly every project that I've touched as a digital service expert in government, it's all about the user each and every time. So definitely showcase how you're always thinking about users and how you're leveraging your experience to help the mission. And then finally, if you are interested in applying, we are still hiring. So definitely check out usds.gov to learn more. So I know I'm not, I had to plug this in, I'm sorry.
No, it's always good to give people leads. Jean.
Yeah, I don't really know to what extent my experience generalizes. I think particularly just because the labor market seems so different now than it was when I was first getting started. I really like how Christopher broke out advice into like early and late stage career. That's very smart. But I think that the most useful advice that I ever received when I was thinking about working in government was Hunter Owens, who works at Caltrans now, told me that I should talk to the people I know and figure out like who is doing interesting things within agencies, because there's a very wide diversity of empowerment and capacity within different government agencies. I think that the assessor's office is a team that is incredibly empowered and very high capacity, the data team in particular. And I think that is uncharacteristic of assessor's offices around the country. Often it's, one or two folks who are contracting most of the work out to private contractors. So I think I really appreciated that advice, and it was super helpful that trying to figure out what is like the institutional context for the place that I'm interested in joining, and thinking strategically about what's the type of context where you will be like leveraged to do good work, which I guess is like mostly more for mid-senior career folks. But that's what I have.
Yeah. Junbei.
Sure. I am also not entirely sure how well my experience generalizes either, but I will share it. So like my context for working for the government directly is in the city of Philadelphia. I was a digital services architect there for a couple of years between the Nutter and Kenny administrations. I was there for the transition. Transitions are rough, as Nikki alluded to earlier. And I was able to kind of luck into that role because I had been involved in the community for a few years and kind of grew up with some of the other folks who are now already in the government and thinking about who should be on various teams within different places in technology in that government. So for me, it has a lot of my roles in civic technology have very much depended on my networks. If I can generalize anything from my experience in that realm, it would be, really be interested in the work that, like, find out people who are doing work that you that clicks with you, and like really be interested in their work to the extent that you talk to them about it, you ask them about it, you collaborate on it with them if you can. And that's difficult advice for me to give because not everybody is in a position to give out free labor. But just having a broad and wide network of people who share your ethics, your interests, that you may be able to pull on is a hugely valuable thing in my experience.
Nikki.
Yeah, so I'm also gonna split it up by career stages. I've talked to a lot of people who are just graduating college or graduate school and starting their journey into the workforce. And I tell them something that I don't hear a lot of other people in GovTech telling them. By the way, also my advice is only for GovTech because that's all I've done. But I tell them if you can go work for a large tech company for like 3 years. And there's two reasons for that. One is financial. Like if you're able to establish some financial cushion for yourself, like it's rough out here. America in 2023 is not an easy place to be a young person. So if you can establish any sort of financial safety net for yourself, you should not take that lightly. And then the other reason is in this country, there are sort of two kinds of organizations that are delivering services to hundreds of millions of people. There's government teams, the majority of which are struggling to do that. And there's large tech companies, which are struggling at certain parts of it, but there's a lot of pieces of like just the machinery, the project management, like how do they manage their repos? How do they do staging environments? Like really not exciting stuff. But it's really important stuff. And if you can go and not drink the Kool-Aid, take their money and just like absorb as much knowledge as possible, I think that'll really benefit you. So that's advice I give people. If you have the opportunity to do that, don't just turn it down for principled reasons. Like you can still go work at like Amazon in a principled way where you're like, I'm going to learn how to be really good at specific things. And then I'm going to leave and I'm going to go take those things and I'll use them to do good. For people who are a little bit farther in their career, I encourage them to really think about what growth looks like for them and what a supportive environment looks like, and to sort of chase like, where's an environment where you can be learning? So for example, if you're comparing two opportunities, which one is the one where you have management that will have your back? Which one's the one where there are seniors that you respect, that you think you can learn things from, and not hinging so much on like which one's the shiniest problem space, but like also looking at like, what's for you. And then for senior career people, it's usually just the like, oh, how do you like connect to places and get a job? So if you want to work at the federal government, USDS 18F have sort of like these external facing opportunities posted where you can just like apply like a normal job. But also USA Jobs is a website that's like the indeed.com of federal jobs, except not as user friendly. But actually, they have a pretty good UX team. Like they're constantly iterating, like they're actually improving the product. So like I'm not throwing shade at them. A lot of the unfriendliness is more due to the regulations around how hiring works and like how people have to format job postings, not the product itself. And if you're looking at a federal job, you need to change how you think about resumes. In the private sector, a resume is a thing to like pique a company's interest and get a conversation started. And in most federal agencies, the resume is treated as the sole and final proof that you are qualified for a job. So private sector, your resume should be a page, should be brief, should be catchy, right? You will not get hired by a government agency with that resume because it doesn't prove that you're qualified for the job. 18F has a really good guide. Actually, it's the Technology Transformation Services talent team now has a guide up on how to prepare a federal resume, which I can give Lori the link. She can share it out to anybody who's interested. So follow that. Don't get caught by the resume tricks, and look for a good agency. There's a lot of people who are doing recruiting. There's a lot more stuff happening on LinkedIn, and as Christopher mentioned, there's all these cool state level agencies and digital services teams. So for folks who are like mid to senior career, I would definitely check those out as well. And for early career folks, learn as much as possible. There's fellowships, there's opportunities like US Digital Corps as well.
Thank you all. I will piggyback off the shameless plug and just say, I think one of the goals of groups like Shy Hack Night is to facilitate some of that awareness, like how to find about groups that are doing work that you might be interested in, and also potentially some of the network, like learn who those people are and kind of like have access to that kind of space. So shameless plug for Shy Hack Night. And we do have a jobs channel again in the Slack. Okay, and with that, I will open up to audience questions. We have a couple already. I will start with this question. So for folks who have worked with people who have been doing tech work in the civic space for 20 or 30 years, have you learned anything interesting from them? So maybe folks who started before it was Civic Tech and who were just doing technology and government before it was cool. That was my editorializing, not the question askers. If anyone wants to speak to that.
I think that's a hard one because I don't think the field has existed that long. I will say that so my own path was also, I also lucked into this. I first started as a normal bureaucrat working for the Illinois Department of Employment Security in a field office during the last recession. And the system I first started with was from like 1975. And it was like a DOS-based system, and just really eye-opening in terms of, okay, wait, these are the tools that government employees have to work with to try to fight things like recessions and getting people's helping put food on people's tables, and literally everything that we're spending time and money on to make sure it happens. And this is what we have to work with. And it just got me really frustrated. But one of the things that I kept in mind as I moved into more of the technology space was that there was a perception in some corners of the early civic tech world that government people didn't know what they were doing, which is not true. The people who are on the front lines working to try to deliver services know what they do, know what they're doing. They know what the program means. They know all of this insight into how these government services work and don't work. And I think it's important to make sure that when we're working with agencies, the agencies are the experts. The agencies are the ones who know what to do and kind of know their programs. We are there to support them and back them up with our technology and design skills. And certainly we are in a supporting role. It's not that, oh, I'm going to sprinkle magic technology dust all over this and it's going to be instantly better. No, we're in definitely a supporting role. And sometimes I feel like every once in a while we have to hit that hammer on the head that like it's the government frontline workers are doing just amazing work in getting us through things like 2020, which was not fun.
I think that's a really important like attitude to take if you want to be effective as a technologist in government. Is you need to be really comfortable being like, I'm the sidekick to your hero when you work with program and policy folks. Like you're not there to save the day or steal the show. You're there to help people who already know what should be happening and want to make it happen. You're just like there to hand them tools and try to smooth the way for them as much as possible, right? You're there to empower and enable them. I think the other thing is like, when I think about like some of the long-term technologists that I've met who've worked in government for like their whole career for decades, I think that there's sort of two camps of people I've met. There's people who are not necessarily super excited about all the changes we're talking about because they've just been like in the trenches and doing it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm not going to super go into that. But there's another population of people who like, you essentially find out that they've been doing these things that you're talking about like the entire time. And those people are always so humble and quiet about themselves, but also like really inspirational. Like I was working with the state of California in one of their Medicaid offices, just trying to help like prototypes and concepts. And we met somebody who was part of the IT org who like did like COBOL. And it turned out that she was like the one person on the team who was like, I need to know what the like program analysts are doing. And so she would just like physically walk over to their building and go to the space where all the analysts sat in their cubicles and were like processing people's like Medicaid claims. And she would just ask them, you know, what was working, what wasn't working, and then go back and like make a bunch of updates to the system and then come back. And so she had just you know, completely independently of any formal education, basically come up with user-centered design when it came to like managing her stakeholders, instead of just being like, oh yeah, you'll just send over tickets and I'll do them when I feel like it. You know, she's actively reaching out and doing primary research with her audience. And, you know, people like that, I'm always like, I'm so grateful to have met somebody like you. And most people just like don't even know that you exist, but you're the coolest person in the world in my mind.
Yeah, and to actually jump on Nikki's distinction there and speaking a little bit more about that second class of people, you know, I think I learned from some of them just the amount of humility and patience that's necessary to be involved in government technology for long and to maintain that kind of willingness to still, you know, be focused on the users and so on, because you know, administrations come and go, and priorities change, and you have to find some way to keep doing the work that you're doing anyway, not like, you know, disregarding the orders, so to speak, from the leaders of the organization, but just you know, knowing that nothing lasts forever, no easy situations and no hard situations to work under last forever, and just just having the patience to be able to ride those administrative waves and still do good work is heroic. So that's something that I learned from those folks.
Very inspirational. Thank you. We have just a couple more minutes. Someone else asked, what do we mean by bureaucracy hacking, and are there go-to references that you would recommend to learn more about that?
So I can take this one. So Andrew Greenfield, who was one of the early members of the UK's government digital service, which is what a lot of our digital services are based on, said the best bureaucracy hackers are calm, angry people. People who understand the machinery of government in terms of how does government buy things? How does government budget their money? It does not work the same way as a household budget or a private company. It's complicated with Congress. How do policies get made? What's the difference between a policy versus just a process somebody has always go to? Bureaucracy hacking is understanding how the machinery of government works and which levers you can pull to get a desired outcome. Be it asking someone, well, does the policy really say that? Or is it just a habit you have that you think is policy? And when bureaucracy hackers kind of push back on that, we discover that, oh, the policy doesn't say that. We can do things this easier way that delivers better results for people. And kind of being able to make that persuasive argument, being able to make that in a persuasive argument and convince stakeholders over to your side. Some people refer to this as a sort of bureaucracy navigation, but some of the things that we've on projects that we've done, we've literally figured out a way to make it work through sort of persuasion and cajoling and that sort of skill set. It's a little bit, you have to know enough about government to understand the machinery so you know which levers to pull, but that's sort of what we mean by that.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you have a dirt road, and lots of people drive on the dirt road, you end up with ruts where your tires go. And I think all large organizations of people have these invisible inertias and pathways that everybody is on, as well as explicit official ones. And it's about, being able to see those and identify oh, everybody's doing this thing this way, like Christopher was talking about, and going, okay, I'm going to figure out why people are behaving in a particular way, and then figuring out how can I alter the system to create a different change, right? How can I get people out of the rut that they're in? And sometimes it's not a rut, sometimes it's a railroad track, and you're oh, we shouldn't derail this train. And I think that's a big part of it too, right? Is understanding the difference and being when should we go for a change, and when should we don't touch that thing, you'll break it, because it's easy to sort of be oh, I can just steamroll everybody and get what I want. It's no, they'll just wait you out, and then when you go away in a year, they'll revert all of it. So like Christopher's talking about, winning them over to your side, not just forcing them. It's huge.
Okay, we are almost at time. I see two very quick questions that we can address. One is there was a reference about a book on Civic Tech, which I think was me. Can you clarify what the book is? It's Sid Harrell, the Civic Technologist Practice Guide. She gave a talk at Shy Hack Night about a year and a half ago. So you can also check out her talk on our YouTube, but that's her book. And then the other question was, Christopher, if you can expand on job titles or departments that are hired for under that you mentioned, where should people go to look for those?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Sorry, do you have any more information about specific positions that are open with you guys right now?
If you go to usds.gov, that you will see a big blue button that says apply now, we have all the information with our hiring process and our roles and everything on the site.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so just to wrap up a reminder. So first of all, thank you to our amazing panel. This was really, really great. We really appreciate your time and expertise and perspectives that you all shared. You can imagine the applause of, of people who aren't just me. And we will now transition to the post-presentation Zoom. And I think possibly some of the panelists were able to stick around. No promises, but if you join this Zoom call, bit.ly/chn-remote-zoom, you may be able to run into one or two of them. And once again, our code of conduct will be in effect. And so folks can hop over there. And then finally, we have a tradition at Shy Hack Night, which I'm going to ask the panelists to participate in, which is that we close our live stream with everybody saying the phrase, "Go forth and hack." So I'm going to ask you all to come off of mute and I'll count us down and we can say it in unison. So 1, 2, 3. Go
forth and
hack.
There we go.